second year BA, semester 4, English poetry. Right. So in this semester, the fourth semester, we are going to talk about, in terms of core paper, we're going to talk about in detail the poetry. Okay, from the historic Britishers to the later part of it. We'll be looking into it. The contemporary times. Right. So to start with, let us just quickly look into the historical time, the prehistoric times of poetry. Okay, right. So, if at all, we're going to look into the British poetry, how it all started, Old English poetry, where during the Anglo-Saxon period, if you talk about, was the first thing was the hymn, which was composed by the herdsman, Stedman, which is known as Stedman's hymn, and is one of the earliest recorded pieces of Old English poetry. Then comes you have the Beowulf, the most famous Old English epic poem again, and which talks about the story of the hero Beowulf and how his battle against monsters and his eventual death. That's an example of the epic genre with themes of bravery, mortality, and fate. Now, coming to the next piece of work of that period was the Seafarer, a lyric poem which is about the isolation and hardships of life at sea, reflecting both physical and spiritual journeys. Now, coming to, but then let me just give you a glimpse of what exactly the poetry was. The origins of British poetry are not very certain for different sources, cite different dates, which is, of course, is natural because research throws up new discoveries. Okay, and then over a period of time, we have, the other poets also who have come in, like when you talk about the medieval poetry, Geoffrey Chaucer, the greatest poet of the medieval period, right? Then coming to Sir Thomas More, he was an English poet, one of the most important figures in early English Renaissance literature, and a key figure in the development of the English sonnet. Now next, William Shakespeare. We all know he is a poet, a remarkable poet with his significant works. You can, during the Elizabethan period, and we also have the metaphysical poets, the religious poets, John Milton, Samuel Butler, and Augustan poets of the 18th century. We have Alexander Pope, John Dryden, Jonathan Swift, and so on. And then the Romantic period also saw a good number of poets. Victorian period poetry also during the period of Victorians to Victoria, and then modernist poetry and contemporary British poetry. Right. So uh, basically, if you look into the, as I told you, Old English poetry, the Edmundson is one, and then we have the Beowulf and the Seafarers are some to name a few. Now, if you look at the key features of this poetry of this period, often use alliteration, that is nothing but repetition of consonant sounds, which gives a kind of a music to the poem, right? Rather than rhyme, and it tended to focus on themes of heroism, faith, and religious belief. Then, in the medieval period, if you just spoke about Geoffrey Chaucer, isn't it? So that was immediately after the Norman conquest. The English poetry began to incorporate French and Latin influences, and here the medieval period saw a remarkable rise in courtly love, chivalry themes, and religious poetry, alongside the first notable works in Middle English. Now, if you look at the key features of this medieval poetry also, and they are like, um, most of the poems included allegories, ballads, and lyrical poetry. That is lyric poetry, and there was a growing influence of Christianity, and much of the poetry focused on moral or spiritual themes. Now, as I mentioned just now about the Geoffrey Chaucer's the poet which is spoken about in this period. He was one of the greatest poets of the medieval period. And the Canterbury Tales, which talks about it, it's nothing but a collection of stories told by pilgrims on the way to Canterbury. And this particular piece of work reflects a wide range of society and explores both religious and worldly themes. Then again, another person we can look up to is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a Middle English romance that combines elements of Arthurian legend and chivalric ideals and Christian morality. Then coming to the Renaissance and the Elizabethan poets. So the Renaissance and Elizabethan poetry, if at all you look at the poetry during this period, and there was a major impact of this printing machine. There was a printing machine which was invented by them. It had a lot of influence on this kind of most of the literary work, right? And this is a period which began late in almost in the 15th century, and it was a time of intellectual and cultural revival in Europe. And in England, we could see the flourishing of poetry, especially with the rise of the sonnet form and the entrance of classical literature. Now, when you talk about the key features of this period, the Renaissance and the Elizabethan poetry, one of them was the humanism, okay, and a focus on individual expression and an exploration of beauty, love, and nature. So the development of the sonnet, particularly by poets like Shakespeare and Sidney, became a central feature of English poetry during this point of time. Now, if at all we talk a bit about the notable works of William Shakespeare, he's quite, that is what we're going to read in our syllabus now. That is his sonnets. Known for his sonnets, which were 154, which explores the themes of love, the time, beauty, mortality, and so on. So, in his influence on English poetry and drama is unparalleled. There's nobody else who could stand in par with William Shakespeare. And then again, Sir Philip Sidney, who is the author of Astrophel and Stella, a sonnet sequence that explores the complexities of love. Then Edmund Spenser, best known for the Fairy Queen, an epic poem that blends allegory, mythology, and history. Right? So, when a bit about the metaphysical poets. Just now, I've given a glimpse into. I did mention this in my slide. So, metaphysical poets, who were they? So, they were a group of poets of the 17th century. They were known for their intellectual and often unconventional approach to poetry. They used elaborate metaphors called conceits and explored deep philosophical, spiritual, and emotional themes. First of all, you look at the features of this kind of poetry, or a blend of intellectualism and emotional depth, often exploring subjects like love, death, and religion. Now, another important aspect of this metaphysical poetry is it is known for its complexity and wisdom. So, when you talk about this metaphysical poet, the poets who come to our mind is notable poets are John Donne, Andrew Marvell, okay, John Donne, as such as Be Free and Death Be Not Proud. If at all you speak into these, read these poems, they combine deep spiritual reflection with intense emotion and intellectual reasoning. Now, coming to Andrew Marvell, known for poems like Truth, so his coin is truth. And here also, Marvell blends metaphysical wit with a keen awareness of time and mortality. Right? Now, I've also mentioned about the Augustan poetry. Right? So, after the English Civil War and the restoration of the monarchy, poetry became more formal and focused on reason, right? And order and satire. So, the Augustan period in particular was influenced by classical ideas of literature and aesthetics. We look at the key features of this. So mostly they were of satirical poetry, wit, and social commentary became a very dominating feature of this uh, period, right? With poets turning their attention to human folly, politics, and society. Now, looking at the notable poets of this period, Augustan period, was like John Dryden, who is known for his satirical verse and his work as a poet laureate. Okay, as film and Article is a notable political satire. Then Alexander Pope, one of the most famous satirists, and quotes the rape of the lock and the Dunciad, lampooned social mores and human vanity. Okay? Now moving on to the Romantic period. This period uh, marked a dramatic shift in British poetry. Why? Because the poets turned away from the structured forms. In the preceding period, it was all a formal and was quite had to stick to a reason, right? So these people, these poets of this period, romantic period, turned away from the structured forms and satire of the previous era to focus on emotion, individualism, nature, and the subject. Now, if you look at the key features of this period, the romantic period, it was more on emotions, imagination, and the individual, along with nature, the supernatural, and the common features. So these are the key features which you could find in their poetry of this period, the Romantic period. Right. And what about the who were the most important poets of this period? If you can, I am sure you all can name them, like William Wordsworth, right? And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Lord Byron, T.B. Shelley, John Keats, and so on. Right? Coming to the Victorian poetry, now this one, in this period, that is, it saw a reaction against the optimism of the Romantics. Because the Romantic period comes immediately after the Augustan neoclassical period, right? And here they were quite optimistic. And but this one, like, it saw a reaction against the optimism of the Romantics, influenced by the social and technological changes of the Industrial Revolution. Poets often engaged with themes of social change, morality, and existential crisis. Now, looking at the key features, realism, moral dilemmas. So this is all happened because of the industrial revolution which was going on during this period, right? And a concern with social issues and an exploration of religious faith and doctrine. Now, if at all you have to talk about the notable points of this period, where you get to read about the poems written by Alfred Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Matthew Arnold, and so on. Right? Now, coming to the modernist poet, that is somewhere towards early 20th century, not the recent, the early 20th modernist poetry. And this was again a reaction against the formal constraints of the past, marked by a fragmentation of form, a break from traditional themes, and an exploration of alienation and disillusionment after World War One. So you can see the effects of this kind of a war in these kind of homes. Right. A focus on, if at all you look at the features, key features of this period, that was the focus on fragmentation, disillusionment, and the search for meaning in a rapidly changing world. So, who were the poets of this period? T.S. Eliot, the Ruby Yeats, Ezra Pound were some of them, right? And coming to the contemporary British poets, post-World War II to present. So here, if you look at it, uh, which is quite diverse, with poets exploring a wide range of styles, themes, and cultural identities. So the influence of postmodernism as well as social and political movements has led to a vibrant and experimental poetry scene. Now, what are the features of this contemporary British poetry? Where they were focusing a lot on identity, politics, race, gender, and the impact of technology and globalization on human experience. Now, when you talk about the significant poets of this period, the notable poets, Philip Larkin, Seamus Heaney, Caroline Duffy, and many more. Right? So, if you just look at it, the British poetry has evolved through various historical periods, each marked by unique stylistic shifts and thematic concerns. So, from the epics and heroic tales of the Anglo-Saxon period to the introspective and politically charged verse of the modern era, British poets have continuously shaped and reshaped the landscape of English literature. Right. So, this was all the uh, the discussion or the uh, kind of narration which we feed into the historic, uh, the poetic structure of the British, right? From the old to the middle to the modern, the contemporary English period, right? We discussed the features, the poets of that period, and the kind of poetry which has come up during these periods, right? And so moving on to the actual unit. So we have five units, five blocks. I'm sorry, in this semester 4 and poetry, which is your core paper. We have five blocks. The first block talks about William Shakespeare, John Milton, John Donne, Andrew Marvell, Alexander Pope, and their works and their poetry. Right? And block 2 talks about William Wordsworth, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning. Right? In the third block, that's W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Ted Hughes. Then after these three blocks, there is a change now. That is, we have British poetry, sorry, American poetry, where we have H.W. Longfellow, Walt Whitman. So these above three blocks are all about the British poetry. Now coming to the American poetry. And then we have Robert Frost, Jane Langston Hughes, then W.H. Auden, Maya, and Geo. Then we have the block 5, where we will be reading about the Canadian, Indian, Australian poetry. Okay, under which we will be reading the poems of the poets Margaret Atwood, Sir Silas Webb, Henry Derozio, A.K. Ramanujan, Judith Wright. So these are the five blocks with three units, almost three units in each block, except block 3, which comprises of 2 units, and block 5, which consists of 4 units. So we'll be doing a thorough study about the poetry of British, American, Canadian, Indian, and Australian. Right? So let us start with the first block, where the first block talks about the British poetry. And the poets whose poems we'll be reading are William Shakespeare, John Milton, that is the unit 1. Then we have John Donne, Andrew Marvell, that is second unit, and Alexander Pope, the third. Right? So moving on to the first part of it, that is William Shakespeare. So let us quickly look into the introduction of the poet, and I'm sure we are all familiar with the famous, the one a poet who has contributed a lot to the language English, right? A lot of phrases and a lot of his coined words, a good number of words. So William Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and actor, widely regarded as one of the greatest writers in the English language and world literature. Born in Stratford upon Avon, his works have had an immense and lasting impact on literature, theatre, and the arts. Now, his prolific career includes 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and a variety of other poems. His plays span genres such as tragedy, where we have Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, and comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, and historical plays such as Richard the Third and Oedipus, exploring themes of love, power, betrayal, ambition, and the human condition. His ability to delve into complex characters and universal themes has made his works timeless, appealing to audiences across generations and cultures. But Shakespeare's influence extends beyond the stage, having shaped modern English language and expression. He was also a key figure in the Elizabethan theatre, working as an actor and shareholder in the Globe Theatre. His works continue to be performed, adapted, and studied worldwide, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest literary figures in history. Now, let me just talk about this particular sonnet, where it is right, it is prescribed uh, after the introduction. In the very first unit, we have William Shakespeare, and this is one sonnet, and we're going to read it under the poetry of British under William Shakespeare. So this is a poem about the and and please remember this is one of the sonnets out of the collections of 154 sonnets. Right. Yeah, and it's a poem about the steadfast nature of true love. In this sonnet, Shakespeare describes love as unchanging and constant, no matter the circumstances. Whatever may be the circumstances, and he argues that true love does not alter when faced with challenges or fun, nor does it fade with age or external factors. Love is portrayed as a guiding force, unwavering through life's difficulties. And the poem emphasizes that love is not subject to external conditions or fleeting emotions. Rather, it remains strong and firm. The speaker concludes by asserting that if his definition of love is proven wrong, then he has never written a word, and no man has ever truly loved. Now, the title of the poem is Sonnet 116, as it is part of Shakespeare's collection of 154 sonnets. And if you look at the rhyme scheme, and this is a sonnet of 14-line poem, and it follows the traditional Shakespearean sonnet rhyme scheme, which is ABAB, CBCB, EFTF, and GG. These GG, the last ones are called the couplets. These three are the quatrains. So three quatrains and one couplet. This means the first and third lines rhyme. The second and fourth lines rhyme. And the pattern continues throughout, ending with a rhyming couplet. So if you look at the quatrain, it's like this A B A B. So the first and the third line, which rhymes, then the second and the fourth line rhymes. So in every quatrain, this is the same uh, kind of a sequence which goes on like that, except for the last two, which is called a rhyming couplet. Okay, coming to the images in the poem. Okay, before going on to that, let me just talk about the kind of, I mean, the summary of it. So, as I told you, there are three quatrains. Just give you a summary of this. In the first quatrain, he begins by defining what true love is not. He states that true love does not alter when circumstances change or when the person it loves undergoes changes. As love changes when it faces challenges or difficulties, then it was never true love in the first place. And the speaker emphasizes that genuine love remains steadfast regardless of external influences or the passage of time. And the second quatrain, Shakespeare continues by explaining that love is not controlled by time. He personifies time as a figure who can cause aging and decay. But true love is immune to time's effects. So this kind of an effect can be seen in the mortal or the kind of a structure which perish. But he says love doesn't. So time doesn't have a sort of effect on this love. And so he says that true love is immune to time's effects. Love does not diminish as one grows older, nor does it fade with the passage of years. In fact, love is described as something that outlasts time itself, remaining strong and constant, unaffected by the aging process or the ravages of time. So the third quatrain further reinforces this idea by using the metaphor of a guiding star. Shakespeare compares love to a star, to every wandering bark, meaning a fixed star that helps guide ships lost at sea. So just as the star remains constant in the sky, love remains constant and serves as a reliable guide through life's challenges and uncertainty. And the final rhyming couplet. Shakespeare concludes by making a bold statement. If his description of love is wrong, if true love is not as he has described it, then he has never written anything of value and no person has ever truly loved. Right? So this is what he tries to say in the sonnet 116, that love is as unwavering, eternal, and impervious to time and challenges. And he asserts that real love does not change or fade, no matter the obstacles, and that it remains a constant guiding force. And it also highlights, the poem highlights the permanence of true love, contrasting it with the transitory nature of physical beauty and time itself. And he ends it confidently stating that if love is not as he describes, then true love does not exist. Right? So moving on to the next slide. So let us quickly look into the images now. He has used several vivid and powerful images to convey the qualities of true love. The star to every wandering bar. Love is not love which alters when its alteration finds. Love's not time's fool. It's the ever fixed mark. It is the star to every wandering bar. So here what does this mean, the first one? The star to every wandering bar. So it's like compared to a fixed star that guides a ship through rough seas, symbolizing how love is a constant, reliable guide through life challenges. Next, love is not love, which alters when its alteration finds. This suggests that true love is unwavering and doesn't change when circumstances or people change. Love's not finds food. This image personifies time, indicating that love is not subject to the passage of time or aging. It is the ever fixed mark. Love is like a permanent, unchanging landmark suggesting its stability and permanence. It's the start to every wandering bark. Now again, it is being compared to a guiding star, reinforcing the idea of love as a reliable and steady force. Right. Now let us quickly look into the theme of the poem. The central theme of Sonnet 116 is the endurance and constancy of true love. Shakespeare argues that real love is not subject to change or external influences. True love remains constant and steadfast, regardless of time, obstacles, or personal challenges. So the poem emphasizes that love is not about feeling or fleeting emotions or physical appearance, but rather an unwavering commitment that transcends the passage of time and external forces. Next, there's again another poem which is given here, written by Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, that is in the Seven Ages of Man. It's a monologue from As You Like It by William Shakespeare. So here, if you look at it, the summary of the right, uh, you have see, the stages. What according to the poem is the infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, middle age, old age, and the final death. So, if you look at the summary of this poem, it talks about the infancy as the first stage of life, and where the person is completely dependent on others. And he describes the infant as a helpless, crying child who is mewling and puking, and he's constantly crying for attention. And he's totally dependent. The infant is totally dependent on others for care, symbolizing the beginning of human life, where individuals are most vulnerable. Next stage is childhood, which is depicted as the whining schoolboy. In this case, the child is reluctant to leave home and go to school. The image of the child is like creeping like a snail to school, suggests the child's reluctance and slow pace as he drags himself to the school house. But the metaphor here emphasizes the child's dislike of the responsibilities of learning and growing up. Next stage, that is the third stage, is adolescence, represented by the lover in this phase. The young person is full of passion and idealism, and a vivid imagery is being used to depict the lover who is sighing like a furnace, okay, and writing love poems. And the lover's thoughts are consumed by love, and his behavior is driven by the intense emotions and fantasies of youth. Next stage, that is the fourth stage, is adulthood, which is again represented by the soldier. Now, in this case, he is driven by ambition and the desire for honor and glory. So the soldier seeks to prove his worth and fight for reputation, even if it means taking unnecessary risks. And the soldier is being described as being jealous in honor, eager to protect his status, and engage in battle for personal gain. And his life is marked by bravado, competitiveness, and the search for recognition. Next, it's the middle age, which is the fifth stage, represented by the justice. In this phase, the person becomes wise, experienced, and focused on upholding authority. The middle-aged person is described as having a fair, round belly with good cap on, lined, symbolizing prosperity and contentment. Now, the justice is now concerned with managing affairs, making judgments, and perhaps becoming more self-assured in their role in society. So here they are marked by a sense of responsibility and maturity, that is the middle age. Coming to the old age, which is the sixth stage, which is represented by the lean and slippered pantaloons. In this phase, the person's physical abilities decline, The old man becomes frail and weak, his body shriveled and he is no longer active. He wears spectacles in nose and his youthful pose, I mean the pants have become a word too wide. Okay, so the image of the slippered pantaloon conveys the image of an old man who is slow, feeble, and less capable of action, and he is depicted as a sign of physical decline and dependency. So the last and the final stage is the death, which is described as second childishness and near oblivion. In this case, the person regresses to a state similar to infancy. So you can see the infancy state comes back again as the final state, becoming completely dependent on others again. The person loses the faculties of reason and memory, symbolizing the complete loss of self. The image of second childishness reflects the idea that old age is not just a time of physical decline, but a return to a state of dependence, much like the very beginning of life. Finally, death is the ultimate end, a natural part of the cycle. Right. So if you try to, just put it in a nutshell, they are like simply a strange, eventful history that eventually ends in death. The final stage. He emphasizes the cyclical nature of life that people pass through these stages, ultimately regressing to the same helpless state as they were in infancy. So the seven stages of life form a complete narrative suggesting the transient nature of human existence and how individuals play different roles throughout their life, much like actors on a stage. Yeah. Then, looking at the structure of the poem, the poem is a monologue consisting of a seven stanzas of 5 lines each, following a consistent rhyme scheme of AAB, AB. The regular structure reflects the order and predictability of the stages of life. So here the rhyming scheme is AAB, AB. Now you can see a lot of use of similes and metaphors in this poem. He employs both similes and metaphors to describe the different ages. Simile, for an example, and then the whining schoolboy with his sachet and shining morning face creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. Here the comparison of the schoolboy to a snail emphasizes his reluctance and slow pace in life. So looking at the metaphor and example, last scene of all that ends the strange eventful history is second childishness and near oblivion. So the metaphor of second childishness represents the regression into a state of dependency and loss of faculties in old age. That is the last sixth stage, right? There's a metaphor. Right. Now, looking at the tone of the tone of the poem is reflective and philosophical. Jack views the stages of life as a performance where each individual plays their role but ultimately faces the inevitable decline of age and death. So the philosophical tone suggests a recognition of life's transient nature and the inevitability of aging and mortality. There is a sense of inevitability as each phase is part of a natural cycle that everyone must go through. So if you look at the theme of the poem, so the main theme of the seven ages of man is the transience of life and the inevitable passage of time. Shakespeare portrays life as a series of roles that humans play from infant to old age, with each stage having its own distinct characteristics. The poem reflects on how people change over time and how life's journey leads to death, emphasizing the fleeting nature of human existence. So the idea of life as a stage, with individuals merely actors playing their parts, further underscores the impermanence and cyclical nature of human life. Right. In the same unit, we've got to read about John Milton. The next poet uh, of the first unit is John Milton, who was an English poet, essayist, and intellectually widely regarded as one of the greatest writers in the English language. He is best known for his epic poem Paradise Lost, which explores themes of free will, temptation, and the fall of man. Milton's works often reflect his strong political and religious beliefs as well as his personal experiences, including his blindness, which he revealed later in life. He was a prominent figure in the English Civil War, aligning himself with the Puritan cause and even serving as a civil servant for the Commonwealth government under Oliver Cromwell. His works such as Areopagitica show his commitment to liberty and individual rights. Now, on his blindness, it's a sonnet written by John Milton, in which he reflects on the personal struggle and despair of losing his sight. The poem reveals Milton's feelings of frustration and helplessness, as he grapples with the idea that his blindness might prevent him from fulfilling his ambitions, particularly his desire to serve God through writing. Milton contemplates whether he can still be of service to God and whether his disability will hinder his spiritual and creative contribution. Ultimately, the sonnet concludes with a sense of acceptance, as Milton recognizes that God has a purpose for everyone, and that serving God does not always require visible or outward acts. Right. So here, in this poem, which actually begins with Milton expressing his frustration and sorrow over the fact that he has lost his sight. So in the first 8 lines, that is the octave. So this is how the sonnet is written, not like the 3 quatrains and a couplet, but here you see an octave and a sestet. The first 8 lines, he laments that he is no longer able to use his intellectual and creative abilities to serve God through writing. So Milton had been a prolific writer and had hoped to continue composing works that would serve God's will. But now what happened with blindness, limiting his capacity to engage in these activities, he feels as though he has been deprived of his ability to contribute meaningfully. On the second line, he questions whether he will still be able to fulfill the purpose he believes he was created for, not to serve God with his talent. So the phrase, when I consider how my life is spent, is a reflection of the poet's regret over how his potential is now diminished by his blindness. He fears that his inability to write, read, or contribute intellectually means he is no longer able to serve God in the way he wanted to, he intended to. So in the sestet, that is the next final 6 lines of the sonnet, he experiences a shift in perspective. So the speaker begins to reconsider his initial despair. He acknowledges that God doesn't need human action or physical ability to accomplish his purposes. The notion that one must be physically active in service to God is challenged, and the speaker comes to realize that patience and faith are also valuable forms of service. The final lines emphasize this understanding, concluding with the famous line, they also serve who only stand and wait. So this line conveys the idea that even those who do not engage in active, visible work of God can still fulfill their divine purpose simply by accepting His will and patiently waiting for His guidance. Now this suggests that quiet faith and humility are also important forms of service, and that God's plan is not limited by human limitations. Right. So if you look at the tone of the tone of the poem is reflective, melancholic, and philosophical. So in the first part, the speaker expresses frustration and sorrow over his blindness and the perceived loss of his ability to serve God as he once could. However, as the poem progresses, the tone shifts to one of acceptance and resignation. The speaker comes to the realization that God does not need human acts of service, as they also serve who only stand and wait, a conclusion that brings peace and understanding. Now, looking at the themes of the poem, the key themes of this poem are faith and service, patience and resignation, the human condition, divine purpose, and providence. So faith and service, which reflects Milton's struggle with how he can serve God given his disability, ultimately realizing that service can take different forms beyond active work. Patience and resignation, the speaker learns that waiting in faith and accepting one's circumstances can be a form of service to God, emphasizing the importance of patience and trust. The human condition, Milton contemplates how human suffering affects one's life and how people must find new ways of serving a higher purpose when faced with challenges. Divine purpose and providence, the sonnet ultimately suggests that God's will is beyond human understanding and that He has a plan for everyone, whether or not it involves visible or outward achievement. Now, what is the significance of the last line of the poem? So the last line of the poem, they also serve who only stand and wait, is significant because it offers a sense of comfort and reassurance to both the speaker and the reader. It suggests that service to God does not always require active work or outward achievement, which we usually believe in, right? So those who endure patiently waiting for divine will be redeemed or equally valuable in God's eyes. This line reinforces the idea that divine purpose and service are not bound by human limitations and that God values faith and patience. Now the sonnet follows the Petrarchan Italian sonnet form, right? And that is the octave and sestet, which consists of an octave, 8 lines, and a sestet, 6 lines. So the octave discusses Milton's sorrows over his blindness and his fear of not being able to fulfill his creative potential. Whereas the sestet, the next 6 lines, offers a shift in perspective with the speaker finding solace in the idea that God may have other plans for him. This structure allows the poem to develop a problem in the first 8 lines and resolve it in the final 6 lines, providing a sense of emotional and philosophical resolution. So overall, On His Blindness is a profound reflection on the nature of suffering, faith, and the ways in which individuals can serve a higher purpose even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Right. So here we finish the first unit. Uh, we under block one, we completed the first unit and the second unit partially. That is up to John Donne, and we still have the third unit with Andrew Marvell of the second unit. So we have Alexander Pope and Andrew Marvell's poetry in the next session. So the next session is uh, again on next Friday, right? So I want you all to go through the book and listen to my audio and watch my video and try to read the textbook. Then you will have a clear understanding of the lesson, right? The unit. So as of now, we are still in block one. So the next class, I'm sure, will be finishing this first block along with the third unit and the part of the second unit. Thank you so much.